Holding body very still. Just observe. Just observe. Those of you in the Zendo, please come in front of the altar, bring your cushion. Rearranging a little furniture here. Those of you on Zoom, please face your computer screen. And unless you're real self-conscious, you could also turn on your face so I can see you for 30 seconds. Then you can turn it back off and go into doing whatever you were doing besides listening to the upcoming talk. Some people are, what do they call those? Double doers? No, that's not. Doppelgangers. No, that's not that. What does that mean? We do several things at once.
Multitask.
Yeah. There's no such thing as a multitasker. I'm happy to disagree with you if you like.
Greg Bowie, multitaskers.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, multitaskers. Good one. Thank you. So the title of the talk is My Teachers. I just came up with that at the last minute. don't even know exactly what I'm going to talk about, but perhaps you can help me with questions as we go along. Before we do that, thank you so much for joining us, for being part of this community, even if it's only for a little while. And also thank you to those of you who not only participate with this Sangha, this community, Soku Koji, but also to those of you who donate and help us stay afloat, help us pay the bills and so on, keep everything going. This kind of activity doesn't generate income particularly. It can, so I think some large monasteries are very good at fundraising and might be doing very well. And I think we will do quite well as we go along. This takes time. So thank you very much. Continue to help us if you can. Very much appreciated. Might not look like it, but it is very much appreciated. So thank you. So my teachers, I thought of different ways of discussing this, and I didn't really want to start with my very first teacher that I recognized as a teacher. I think I was 3 and she was 4 maybe. And no, it's not that. She showed me how to share. She broke her hamburger in half and gave me half. I can't tell you how excited I was about that at 3 years old. And I immediately ran back inside to tell my mother and whoever else, my grandmother, whoever else was there. It just was, never have anybody come from someplace else and take their food and give me part of it. It's quite a big deal in that young person's mind stream. And I thought about mentioning other teachers that I had when I went to art school, or could even go back to Mrs. Vest, who was my 3rd grade teacher, and tell you probably the first person I met who, as a teacher, who didn't look down on me, who actually met me right where I was at. At the time, I didn't know what that meant. I just thought it was odd that I could feel so good about being around an adult. Pretty amazing. Other children, I think, felt the same way around her. Beautiful woman. Then I could go through the whole my disagreement with the Western way of educating people, starting out by testing people. Don't test anyone. Very, very disrespectful to take a person with all the dependent origination that arises in anyone's mind, including how they were treated when they were 3, and just assume that everybody should study and test the same damn thing. Some people are going to be excellent, going to be wonderful at that, very exciting champions, award winners, and other people who are by far more intelligent and insightful than that person not get any acknowledgement or recognition at all, because they understand differently. And there's probably countless varieties. When I say countless, I mean every single person. That's why you can't count it. Every single person is completely unique. So in order to be an educator, if you want to do that, if you want to be one, then practice what? Meeting yourself where you're at. Because if you are covering up yourself with your, and here comes the fancy word, your bullshit, then you'll cover up the other person. You want to be successful as a teacher rather than wanting them to actually benefit from what you have to say. Big difference there. I told you I didn't know how to talk about this. I don't. This is I come out of an emotional basis. I don't come out of intellect. But I'm happy to deal with your intellect if you want to bring it this way. Does it sound like a challenge? It is. I'm getting worse and I'm getting better. I'm getting worse because I'm more cranky about what I see around me. People that will not look at who they are and want to fight with it and want to blame others. Now I'll tell you about my teachers. Nobody's to blame this, but everyone's responsible. You can do this. Spend some time. Train your mind, please. Train your mind so you don't dump any of your unexamined crap on other people because you don't like to feel bad. The Buddha said, life is suffering, and he was not kidding us. If you haven't understood that truth, don't go to the next one. There's 4 of them. The next teacher I had that met me where I was at was an art teacher. And I can't remember how he did that, but with him it was also presence, just his presence. He's long passed away. Never have forgotten him. And then I had another art teacher at the Art Institute of Chicago who also was, I'm not going to go into detail, but you could sense this person was looking at you, listening to you, and then responding to you out of whatever is showing up in your mind stream. Not some kind of fancy instructions about things or being in charge or being the authority about what was being taught. And then I met, amongst other people, Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche in 1973. And then he helped me see how to be a student. And that's when I began the hard work. Of being a student to everyone. Everyone is teaching you. If my I apologize if this seems to interrupt something that I'm trying to convey, but it's pretty emotional for me. Yeah, I can't be helped. I can't present myself as someone who's got their shit together. I never have had. At least I haven't had for the last couple of decades. And you don't have to get yours together either. You do not have to know. You do not have to understand. You have to see what this is. That's the warning, according to Susan Hirschfield. You hear my nose blow, I'm about to dump another ton of cinder blocks on you. And he did that with his presence. He also did it with his teaching, his writing, the book Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which we've been studying since we first started almost 50 years ago. 1975 is when I started studying that with others formally. Sit down in a group and study the book. Discuss it. And in those days, didn't have anybody to ask any questions of. But everyone, if you're a student, then everyone is your teacher. All of your relationships, even the ones that ended in divorce or separation, teachers, every single one of them. So I can tell a few stories about Trungpa Rinpoche and the very few interactions I had with him. Not many, 4. I think it might have been more that I'm not sure. But it was his presence that you knew you were being received. You're being listened to. You were being met right where you were at. I'm not very good at that. I'm working on it. He was amazing at that. My takeaway from that is I just met someone for the first time. I was just comparing in my mind Trungpa Rinpoche to Kobun Roshi, who was a totally different teacher. I seemed to needed 2 completely opposite teachers to deal with my transcendental dyslexia, otherwise known as ignorance form. He was very present also, so present that it was embarrassing to be with someone who was so simple, so direct, so present, so kind. Been thinking about this talk for years and didn't want to give it. Are you afraid to show up like I'm showing up? You're afraid to be vulnerable to your own memories, your own feelings, your own students? Shouldn't I be acting more like a Zen master? Way to stick around or something? We're talking about here ultimate truth. This is what I'm pointing at as a relative being living in the same damn world that you're in with the same chaos, with huge landslides coming in every direction, including the one in your mind stream. And I'm saying, just observe. If it's coming towards you, you have it coming, not because you're to blame, but because you're not separate from anything. All the movement that you see coming, going, is your mind, not yours personally, not the personhood, but this mind. It doesn't belong to anyone. Okay, give me some questions so I can get some help here. Sir?
Shoto bowing. You were talking about receiving everybody as a teacher?
Yes.
And it seems like with the formal teacher-student relationship, you might give us some direction.
Yes.
But I notice when other people try to give me direction, there's a lot of resistance. Or
Yes. What's your question?
should we be taking direction from other people if we're trying to relate to them as a teacher?
You should listen to them. That's the first thing, is just to listen to what they're saying without covering up with what they're saying with what you think they said. If you're listening to somebody, you won't know what they're saying. If you think you know what they're saying, the very nature of ignorance is to disagree or object or cover up with your ideas and your conjunctions about that. That's why you need a teacher, so the teacher can introduce you to this world, so that that teacher can tell you, say to you, suggest to you that you might want to just receive everything. Start by receiving a wall, the mind that shows up on the wall. There's no one there but you, but you'll notice how all the various kinds of emotions, feelings, passion, aggression, ignorance, hope, and fear, on and on and on, keep showing up in the mind stream. Receive that, practice on that. So when you go out and meet someone, possibly your life partner, possibly in your case, I would say your dad. I don't have to even meet your dad. All I have to do is meet you. You know what I'm talking about. You know, that's your teacher. I had a stepfather who was also a teacher of mine. He didn't know it, but he wasn't a teacher at the time. I had to look back on it to see how much he taught me. Same thing with my mother. More? You'll say.
I'm just thinking, since everything in life is coming at us at
A little bit louder if you could, please.
everything in life is coming towards us at, I think, lightning speed.
Yes.
Some is hit and some is miss in our life.
What is your question? I'm totally
So,
with you.
Yeah.
I'm
So-
totally with you. What's your question?
So some is hit and some is miss. So you said, and when we meditate, just observe. Don't engage, just observe.
I didn't say don't engage.
You didn't
I said just observe.
just observe. So by just observing
Yes.
means, are we avoiding sowing any karmic seed? Where does karma fit in this
It
group?
doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit.
No. It's karma is a description that to address relative truth, which is unreal. It's an illusion. So you don't have to worry about your karma. Just meet everything where it's at as it shows up in your mind stream without objecting, without agreeing, without shutting down, and transcend the attachment to the singularity we call a human being, human form. You have to see it. You don't have to change it. You don't have to conquer it. You're welcome. Yes.
Well, Divine, you said Rinpoche taught you how to be a student. How did he teach you?
By showing me that he was a student. I expected someone to, when I started saying all the things that were wrong with me and I couldn't do, and how confused I was and how insane I was, he just listened. He gave me no advice other than, "Are you sitting?" "Yes." He said, "Keep sitting." That's all I got from him. Now, I'm not saying that he had a standard, that he was saying that to everyone. He might have been saying, "You need to pack up your bags and move to Boulder and live in Kalapa Court," or something like that. Everyone got different treatment from him. More?
Bune bowing, how do others, or we're talking about teachers, from the girl that broke the hamburger to everyone that is your teacher, how do others show you who you are?
Takes a while. You have to receive people where they're at, how they show up, receive them. And also receive, at the same time you're doing that, if you've been training your mind, you'll find you get much better at not only receiving what shows up, but also receiving on what you're adding onto it, what you think is showing up. You become very aware of your projection onto others in the form of, "I don't like them," or in the form of, "They're crazy," or in the form of, "I've never met somebody so confused," or in the form of, "They're really wonderful. They seem to have a very good intellect." I could go on, but I don't need to. You know what I mean. Everybody you meet, you have different ideas about. All projections. They're cover-ups of what is in front of you. Let's go back to your question. What is it?
Where in that equation is the who you are? How do others show you who you are?
By seeing who you think others are and not agreeing with it. Passion, grasping. Not disagreeing with it. Aggression, pushing, and not avoiding it, looking away, distracting yourself into some other idea about it. And also not maintaining it, which is another form of ignorance. Just return to it, return to it. It just completely takes away all the supports and the crutches and the reference points and the fuel and the nutrition. The ego needs to continue to be a separate person from everything else. Don't believe a word I say, but you could consider it. And how do you consider it? Spend 10 or 20 years looking at the wall. Find a community that supports you in doing that. That's what this building is about. This is why I ask for help, not because we make any promises to anyone, any guarantees. If it's a spiritual path, there'll be no guarantees. That's a cheap shot. You can't guarantee the spiritual path because there's no result. Results are about relative truth, and there are plenty of meditation teachers out there all over YouTube that are promising you things. You'll feel better, you'll be more mindful, you'll be more clear, you'll be less harmful. And that, to some extent, probably is true. Anybody that sits down and does nothing for long periods of time, even if they have their eyes closed, is probably going to slow down a little bit, not be quite so speedy, and assume that's some kind of enlightenment. Go ahead.
Bune bowing. This statement, this idea, this encouragement to find out who you are sounds like it's going to get down to something solid.
It does, doesn't it? That's spiritual materialism. You can't help it that you're a double Taurus. Can you? You're here and you have, I'm just not going to go into astrology, but I'm just saying you can't, you're here, you didn't create this person. There are people that talk about it differently, but you don't have any say-so about anything. We don't have control. But what we can do is we have all these receptors: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, fingertips. Just receive, receive, receive. Don't produce anything unless you have to. You might have to chase down a deer and kill it in ancient times. These days, you might have to go to the supermarket. You might have to do this situationally. So what we're doing here is saying, sit down, find out who you are, so you don't project your misunderstanding, your pain, and your suffering on others, and then try to correct them. Don't correct yourself either. More?
You and bowing, how is maybe asking the question or looking or trying to find out who I am different than what I am?
Boil that down a little bit for me. What do you want to know?
What is the difference between who I am and what I am?
Who you are is a kind of separate identity, and what you are is maybe more down into the substrate of what you are rather than an identity. It's what is this? It's dependently risen. Who you are is the illusion that you're a separate being, and seeing that you're an illusion, seeing that this is an illusion. If you see it totally, it's Buddhahood. You don't have to get rid of the illusion. If you think you do, then we're right back to the circle of samsara, success and failure, right and wrong, and you'll actually die thinking you're enlightened. Here it comes. I made that as loud as I could in honor of someone who's louder. More?
Bowing, so hearing you describe who and what is looking for who I am, just looking at the illusion.
Did I lose you? I don't know. I'm here. Where are you?
All over.
That's awareness. That's awareness. When you say, I'm all over or I'm confused, don't get rid of that. Don't repair anything. Do not fix anything. Do not heal. I'm not saying don't heal. You're a nurse. I'm not saying a relative structure, but to use the healing kind of idea in the mind stream, it's a circle. If you buy into that kind of situation, then it just gets worse and you get sick again. You see it that a little bit. You must see it in your work. More? Any other questions here? Yes.
Sokuzan, earlier this week, you said something along the lines of when we bring you our delusion, you're completely deluded with us.
Of course. We can't help you unless I'm not separate from you, unless I actually see it. I'm the crap you're trying to get rid of, except I'm not trying to get rid of anything. Why would I get rid of my arm? Why would I get rid of my foot? Why would I get rid of anything? Why would I get rid of anything? More?
Aldovai, it seems like you've created or we've received a powerful training mandala here. We're benefiting from a very particular
Yes,
training mandala.
it is.
How much of your relationship with Rinpoche was from you and not the training mandala that he had created?
Oh, I don't know. Because I did what he told me to do. I mean, personally, all he said was keep meditating, keep basically encouragement to keep going. But what he set up is I looked at what his students were saying and what should be done and what we should study and we should sit Yinton every once a month anyway, which is 9 hours, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, 3 hours in the evening. So that's what we did. That's what I did here in Battle Creek. And there wasn't anybody doing that here, so I was going over to Ann Arbor to meet with a group over there. So I'm not sure if there's more that. Then there's all the seminary transcripts and all the books that he wrote, studying those and studying other texts. More?
The volume, I guess I'm looking at the inspiration. How much of the training or your relationship with Rinpoche, seems like the way you describe it was you were just all in right from the very beginning.
Well, I looked around a little bit. I went up and practiced sesshin with Category Roshi in Minneapolis. So I was still trying to see who he was, and I didn't particularly care for Tibetan Buddhism with all the phantasmagoria and all the fancy rituals and so on. I wasn't drawn to that. It was his presence I was drawn to. And my first contact was with, as many of you already know, was reading Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which was published, I think, in '72. I read it in the summer of '73, right about the time. It's very difficult for anybody to read that and not see that there's quite a bit of understanding and value and a way of talking about the Buddha's Dharma in a very straightforward way that is kind of surprising. He'd only been in the West for, at that time, about 12 years. And it seems like that was long enough for him to be able to teach what he had learned or what he had understood from his teachers in his practice. He's a tulku, so he was started at the age of about 4, being trained by monks in a monastery. And so he was just an extremely good communicator.
Although I want to try one more time to get to my question.
I hope so.
How much of it is the form that carries us? And how much of it is our own inspiration?
It's all of that. And the inspiration can come and go. If you're on this path for very long, eventually it starts to all come apart. This is how emptiness shows up, as your particular understanding or even your enthusiasm, or your interest in even practicing this comes apart. For me, that was very necessary to have a connection with the teacher, or as I would have said back then, the guru. Teacher is very important to me. And I'm not saying it wasn't important to others also. It was not all that special, but it was also his saying that in, I think it's in one of the books, maybe it's Myth of Freedom or one of those books, that you get too close. You don't get close enough to the teacher, you don't get enough heat. You get too close to the teacher, you get burned. And that was very much like that for me. I didn't have to get very close to him before I started feeling a lot of heat. I kept my distance and just kept practicing for years and years, decades. But this situation that's being presented here with this person is not the result of decades. It's not like a practiced for decades and you'll have this result. There's no result here. There's no result. Nothing happens. If you were going to even use that kind of an image or an understanding, you would have to say nothing happens or less happens. You actually see it yourself, and nothing changes. If you have a really terrible temper, it does not go away. If you have anxiety, may go away, may not. What goes away, if you were to talk about it at all, would be the feeling that you're a separate being. Because everywhere you look, you don't see someone else. You also, I've said it this way, you see yourself, but even that doesn't work either. You don't see anyone else. Everything is empty of the otherness it used to have. So nothing has changed. Because it's always been that. You realize you've always been looking at that. It's just you had covered up, you'd be afraid and covered up from the time you were 3 or 4 years old. Instead of going on like that and eventually falling into some kind of behavior that just stops you from even looking anymore, which happens to quite often to 4, 5, 6 year olds, being tortured by their parents with the idea that they need some kind of training that is about control rather than understanding. Please.
Divine, what was communicated by his presence?
It's been said different ways. Sounds familiar when I hear this, but it feels like your mind comes to a halt. He wasn't doing anything. He was just there. Now, you could also say that I was being affected by, he was this fancy Tibetan guy, but he kind of deliberately went against that. When I first met him, he was wearing a golf shirt and smoking Marlboros. It was just another guy. I think there was 12 other people there in the room. So it didn't seem particularly special to me. He didn't show up as a Tibetan Lama. He wasn't in robes. I'd met those over in Kalamazoo. I'd gone over and met the Lamas, and I was not impressed with them. And also, they were not impressed with me. So, yes.
How did the experience of having your mind stopped in his presence
Excuse me.
affect you?
It was scary. And I both wanted to see more of him, and I also was paranoid about it because it was just like taking overdosing on something that was really good. You can only do so much of that. So I kept doing it. I kept coming. I formed a group here in town, Dharma Study Group, to continue to practice with people. Went to Chicago, and he showed up down there several times. He was just a powerful person who really didn't use that to manipulate anybody that I could see. This quick story: we were standing on a fellow practitioner. This is back in probably 1974 or 5, maybe 75, and I'm down there in Chicago, and Rinpoche's there, and he's just given a what they called then an intensive training seminar, usually lasts Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I've told some of you have heard this before, but I think it's quite interesting. This fellow was standing next to me. We're both looking down on State Street, on the second floor, and we're looking down on the traffic. And it's a summer evening, quite nice. The weather, the windows are open a little bit. Traffic is going by, and then there's a little bit of a gap between us. And Rinpoche came up and stood right between us. And I'm starting to get really paranoid because I know what an idiot I am, but I don't want him to know that. So I'm standing there, and the other fellow who was had quite a maybe less fear than I had. His name's almost showing up here. He had a PhD in philosophy, the other fellow, and so it was quite impressive when he talked. And so he said, I'm kind of inventing this voice from my memory. He said, "So, Rinpoche, what do you think of Chicago?" And Rinpoche, without even looking at him or at me, just looking down the street, says, "Doesn't make any difference what I think of Chicago." And of course, I'm glad I didn't say anything. I was freaked out. But I think I'm glad it was him. He didn't seem to be too affected by it. Just kind of like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I guess Rinpoche doesn't want to shoot the breeze with me. So, and that's how he functioned like that. He wasn't particularly concerned with making friends with you, and that was very powerful to meet somebody who didn't have any interest in controlling you. It seemed just. The only message he had for me is meditate. How much are you meditating? And then I would tell him, and I don't remember what I said, but he said, keep sitting, keep sitting. Every time I met him, the 4 different times I met him in a private interview with him, he always said that. Keep sitting, keep sitting. And of course, what do I say? Keep sitting. Can't promise anything. Further questions in here? Yes.
Shoto bowing. You've talked about a few things that you do differently than like Trungpa Rinpoche.
Yes.
One of those is, I understand Shambhala to be more of a secular approach, but you've ordained people and you
Yes.
go in that direction. What is the importance of having a monastic community for practice bowing?
So I've come from a Tibetan lineage that I practiced in, pretty strong, and still practice in that lineage. I'm still part of Shambhala. People sometimes, why did you leave Shambhala? What an assumption. I haven't left anything. So I am Shambhala. If someone wants to come along and say, no, you're not, then I'd say, okay, well, maybe I'm not. But if you ask me, I'm going to say that because I am that. And so I don't know how to describe it other than what's showing up here. That's why we have what has been created as the Order of Immediate Light, because we have the Zen tradition coming through Kobunchi Roshi and the Kagyu tradition coming from Trungpa Rinpoche and all the other lineage holders down through the centuries that Sokuzan was talking about today. Milarepa, that's what he was talking about. And Mahashapa on the Zen side, Zen Buddhist side. It just seems like it's necessary to have monastics. From watching, spending 30, 35 years, maybe more than that, watching how Shambhala operated over a long period of time and the difficulties in the Sangha and the struggles between people. People need to practice more, and they need to we need to have some people that are dedicating their life to this, not just weekend warriors, and not to be to take away from someone who meditates on the weekend. We need some kind of strong core. So that's what, as far as I'm concerned, that's what this is about, is building a strong, not so much about you or me or anything, but have a place where people can come in a building, a monastery, and it doesn't matter if they're married or have children or anything, not talking about any of this celibacy or any of that. That's, but live in the community, be a householder and also be a monk. That hasn't been done too much that I know of. Quite often when they bring this type of thing from the West or from any direction, they try to do it traditionally the way it was done in Japan, or the way it was done in Korea. You have to do it exactly like the Tibetans teach, or you have to have a Lama teach you how to do Nondro practice. No, you don't. You might have to have someone teach you that who's practiced it, but it doesn't have to be a Lama. Now, if you think it does, then what do I say? Go study with one then. But don't necessarily come this direction and try to dismantle or say this is somehow unauthentic or something, because authenticity is always based on some kind of a judgment or contrast. Go ahead.
Shoto bowing. One of the other things that you don't teach is the idea of everything that the teacher says that I will do.
I don't.
Why doesn't that work?
Well, it doesn't work as a standard. So I'm not going to teach it as a standard. But if you get close to the teacher, as I did, it fits. But it has to do it situationally. You can't just tell everybody they have to mind. But it's not about having a big daddy or a parent or something, although that image has been used too. In the Tibetan tradition, it's the only father guru. So that's used, but this is ancient times back then. It's not now. So that may happen with you. It certainly did with me, but it's unlikely if it's a true teacher that he or she or they are going to tell you something that is going to be somehow manipulative or harmful or abusive. Or right now, if you just go back and listen to what Sokuzan was talking about when he was relating the story of Milarepa, the quite famous sage of the Tibetan Kagyu tradition, who was a murderer, according to the stories. And Marpa had as his teacher, had him build a house out of stones. And then when he got it all done, he says, I didn't tell you to build it there. I told you to build it over there. So he'd have to tear it all down. He said, I didn't want a round house. I wanted a square house. And so was he abusing Milarepa? Well, probably Milarepa might have felt that way, but the culture that was happening in seemed maybe that was the only way he could work with Milarepa. So it's very situational. Am I getting close to what you're asking about? No. Didn't I have you build something for me and then change it? Didn't you think about Milarepa then? Did you think about Marpa the translator? Have I translated anything? I translate everything. No, I'm not a translator. Do you want me to be? Good. Further questions? Go ahead.
Shoto bowing. What can the Sangha learn, or how can we receive when someone in the Sangha steps away from the community or formally leaves?
Any number of things. So some people can't do this for any length of time. It starts to get too uncomfortable. So now I'm not here to say that you're bad if you go another direction. Do whatever you want to do. I mean, if you're fully ordained as a monk, I'm probably going to try to talk you out of that. But when I say talk you out of it, I just might try to communicate, get you to talk to me. What's going on? If it's the one you're talking about recently, of someone who is a fully ordained monk, a longtime student, asking permission to stop being a student of mine, what am I going to say? No, you have to continue. So I don't know. They're probably doing the best they can. I don't know what it's like to be them. But probably it's not easy. One way to stop having that discomfort is to get away from the teacher. But one of the ways you would do that is to start to think that the teacher is probably wrong, the way they're teaching is incorrect, or they're too this or too that. But it doesn't make them wrong. It just means that they believe their thoughts. And if you don't believe your thoughts, you don't disbelieve your thoughts, you don't ignore your thoughts, you're liberated. And what are you liberated into? It's not into anything, it's out of everything. You no longer have reference points. The only way you have a reference point is when a student arrives in front of you. Then you have a reference point. If there are no students, you don't go around promoting yourself as a teacher, which is what this person is kind of doing. It's kind of sneaky about it, though. So this doesn't mean that they won't be able to help people. I'm fully confident that if someone comes to that particular person, which I'm not going to name them, but that they will get help, because that person is very dedicated to being helpful to people. I'm not dedicated to helping you. If I have to kick your ass, I will. But you can also say, well, you're not going to kick my ass. I'm going to move to Utah. Too far away. You could do that. And those of you who get sometimes feel like leaving, what do I say? Move. You have to move. What do I think? Don't move. No, stay here. Finish this path. But if you come and are insistent, like this person was in their own way, I would just say, well, maybe something I don't understand here. Maybe they should go another direction. More?
Sure.
Get back to that.
I'm curious about, to use that guru teaching as an example,
Yes.
that you don't do how he was doing it, your teacher was doing it. How is that, or is that different than the attitude of, I see things differently from the teacher?
That would have worked better if the person would just tell me what they meant. But we never would just say, I see things differently. That's all I ever got. So they just aren't going to tell me what they saw differently. So I'm kind of so it looks more like fear to me. Is it? I don't know. You're no longer a student of mine, so it's fine to ask questions about that, but I don't know how far you might want to ask that person. Find out what they thought. But it's not wrong. So it isn't like they did what they could. I did the best I could. I would say I'm just not a very good teacher. I'm not. If I wanted to approach it that way, why wouldn't I have been able to somehow reach that person in their ignorance and point out to them? I certainly tried for many, many years. Yes.
Are they still Sangha?
Yeah, they're Sangha. From my point of view, everyone is Sangha. They just don't know it. But yes, that person is still Sangha. They've disconnected from this teacher, so they've really, in some sense, have disconnected from the Sangha, but not as individuals. You can continue. I'm all about that. We just talked about that. By all means, go and visit them and listen to them teach if you want to do that. It wouldn't take you away from someone that you were friends with or you had a good connection with. More? Yes.
Future bowing, I think you said you're not all about helping us.
Based on what you think help is. So that's why it might be hard to take what I do or how I teach. I do want to help you, but I don't want to help you cover up your garbage mind so that you can come back lifetime after lifetime after lifetime and suffer or help other people suffer. And I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying, if you realize what this is, the body mind may collapse, but the consciousness doesn't follow it down into hell or into whatever kind of dimension, in some kind of dark area or difficulty, or more spinning, or spinning right back into another lifetime where you have the same table setting. Maybe a different direction. Maybe it's in the 14th century. We're the ones that impose the directionality of past and future, but that's unreal. There's no past and future. Surprise. You think there is? You can go ahead and think that, but you can be born out west in the 1870s. Sound good? No. Probably not so good. No hot water. Yeah, no toothbrushes. More questions about that, please don't hesitate.
How is the vow different than being all about helping us?
So a vow is to be with all things. And another way, if it works better, save all beings. So it's just for some people, you just be with all things, because if you are with all things, and if you're not separating yourself from all things, then the past disappears, the future disappears, and even the present becomes questionable, because the present comes out of not being in the future and not worrying, regretting the past. So it means you're right here all the time. Your body could die right now and you go nowhere. Who you actually are doesn't go anywhere. Consciousness only. And I'm not promoting belief in that, but you could consider that your attachment to your body-mind as a lifetime going on for whatever length of time, that somehow is you and is your reality. This personality is temporary, and it will not last. It will come apart. But it may resurface in some other way if there's unfinished business. In other words, if they're still grasping, if there's still warfare, and if they're still shutting down, then it won't be in perpetuity, but there'll be a lot of going around and around samsara, life and death, life and death, life and death, life. That's the other polarity that we are endeavoring to see through. Other circularity. Born, then we die, and then we're born. And that's why it is said, Banke Taku, Migacho Taku said, we're talking about the unborn, because consciousness doesn't come into existence, can't pass out of existence. But if it's identified with a living form, then that illusion is really strong. I actually think we are Larry Trumbull. You know him? I do.
Your friend Larry?
That's my friend Larry. He thinks he's Larry Trumbull, and I don't disagree with him. Nobody disagrees with Larry. Yes.
In your bowing, was Larry one of your teachers?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, still is. Seriously. No, I'm joking a little bit. No, seriously. Where are you going with that? You know him. I always listened to him. I used to argue with him, but I stopped that years ago. Now I just listen. What does he tell me about? Mushrooms, how to grow mushrooms, beekeeping. Yeah, I could go on and on, but I don't want it to be this talk about Larry. More?
Future bowing, if we've taken the vow,
Pardon me?
or if we have taken the vow or observed the vow,
Observe the all.
and we're endeavoring to be with all things,
Mhm.
for me, that often shows up as having a statement in my mind, how can I be helpful here, or how can I be helpful to this person?
That works. with some of that, it's just obvious you help somebody, or you may not be able to help somebody. But I interrupted you, so what did you, where were you gonna go?
Is there some other phrase or more fundamental endeavor when interacting with people?
I think the best thing, or something I'm always pointing at, is listen. Just really listen to people. Even while you're listening, you might be disagreeing in the back of your mind, well, they don't understand or whatever. But if you can just do a lot of receiving from others, you don't have to agree with them or validate them or disagree or ignore. You can just receive what they're saying. Most people are they have no practice, and even some people who have a practice are covering up their discontent, covering up the first noble truth of suffering. And they're successful relatively for a little while. You can just ignore. You just, every time you start to feel, have difficulty with something, you can get medications. Certain kinds of meditation will take away negative stuff. Activity. So my parents just drank a lot and went bowling a lot and played shuffleboard and visited with their friends and went on picnics until they died. Smoked a lot of cigarettes too. Was that some kind of useless life? No, I wouldn't say so. Pretty common. But this is a spiritual path. You want it? You want to know what this is deeply before you pass on? Find out who you are. Find out what this identity is. There a solid being here called Juju? Is there a real person there? There's a body. You have hands. You can walk out of here and you can come back. But when the body mind drops, who you actually are doesn't go anywhere. But if you still think you're somebody, then that will go on. Am I condemning you to something? No. I mean, there's no guarantee you're going to become a ghost. I can't say that's what's going to happen. But attachment to anything is out of consciousness. It's not out of the grasping hand. This just shows you what grasping is, and shows you what rejection is, or aggression, or shows you what to use that. But eventually this is gone. But then there's the illusion of a self that shows up in a dream. You have a dream body. So consciousness is really complicated and very simple at the same time. More, you have it.
How is the spiritual life at odds with having somewhat of a mundane life?
No, they're not separate. In ancient times, it seemed to be necessary to move to the mountaintop or move to the monastery or go into the forest and hang out with other people in robes and so on. I'm not saying that wouldn't be helpful. That one of the things we do is go into solitary retreat. Right upstairs above this, people have spent, I think, at least a month up there, maybe more than that. I can't recall. Totally alone, just practice for hours, all day long, 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. Go out in the woods, which is what we do here, is people schedule to go into retreat. Ondo's going to be gone for 30 days in solitary retreat. So why don't you do that? What do you want to do that for?
My teacher says to go to the wall.
Well, you could go to the wall right here. Why don't you just do this and hang out? And that way you can party down in the kitchen, and when you're not sitting, just sit 4 or 5 hours a day, and the rest of the time your teacher would let you off the hook, wouldn't he?
Yes, but he also says to sit more.
So the thing about the retreat is then you're really isolating yourself. You have nobody to run your spiel down on. You have no one to blame. You might still be blaming them in your head, but probably after, a couple of weeks of listening to your mind do that, eventually it starts to get worn out and you start to become slowly responsible for your mind stream and your thoughts and your emotions, your opinions. You realize you're creating them. You're just using someone else as something to bounce it off from. But there are no separate beings. If you think there are, if you believe there are, if you feel there are, any of that, you'll continue to spin and you'll torture yourself and you'll torture others to some extent. Some people do this less than others. Some people are overwhelmingly powerful, as we know. Look at the politics. people who seem to have some kind of chemistry to just make motions like this in whole groups of people because they like that kind of a neurosis, that kind of a persona, that puffed up person. And so they want to be part of that. They're tired of looking at their own weakness. And here's a weak person who knows how to pretend to be powerful. Go ahead.
I'm thinking of a friend of mine who it's as if he uses arguing as a way of connecting with people, like we would argue back and forth. And I want to know, is there a way I can stop arguing with him?
Now listen to it.
Will he think I'm not communicating with him
Doesn't
anymore?
matter what he thinks. Don't worry about it, what he thinks. You know what? You have no say so. Go ahead and give me some of his argument and I'll be you. Go ahead. Just anything he said and then I'll respond. And then you be set. You just say just every time you get in an argument, call me up. Say, so he said this and then he said this. And Sokuzan, what should I say? And then I'll tell you. Go ahead.
Hey, dumbass.
Aha. Is that all he said?
He's a lot meaner than that.
Let me hear. So you can't really be that mean.
Yeah, it's kind of confrontational, even to like strangers in public. He just
Yeah.
thinks he's having fun, but it seemed really aggressive.
Yeah. So I don't see any problem. Just don't go around him.
What's my desire to still be friends with that person?
Your ego, your self-centeredness. You don't need that. That's, you don't want to go out and run into that because that is your ego language, that you're still able to relate to him and you're still able to try to work with him and you want to help him. And you're a Buddhist monk, so now maybe even more so, you think that maybe you can even get him to meditate. He's not ready to meditate. Most people cannot do this, at least not the way I'm teaching it. You think there's someone sitting here. There's a human form here, but this is not an individual, and it's not a bragging point. It's completely empty of self and other, and your situation is identical. All you have to do is see it. Stop covering up who you are. You see it yourself. You see it. That almost sounds like you'll say, doesn't it? You see, you'll say. No, it doesn't. Yes.
Since you're bowing, at the very beginning of this talk, did you say that this talk is coming out of emotion and not intellect?
It started out that way. Yeah. I couldn't have you say so about it.
When you say that something is coming out of emotion, is the emotion about something?
Yes. But I can't go there or I can't speak. I'm looking at it all the time, but I can't say it because I get lost. So there's so much suffering. Talking about just your own suffering, that's what's a traditional drop in the bucket. There's so much, and that comes out when you see that this path could possibly address that in humankind, could address it. I don't know if, there's no way to know anything about outcomes because it's not really an outcome. It's more like an intention. It's fast. Prajna or jnana or wisdom is beyond any kind of relative construct. We're caught in this construct because when we think we are this and we are this person in this relationship with this person, in this relationship with the teacher. That's why the relationship with the teacher is so important. The person is still talking, they're still eating food, they're still practicing the forms with you, but there's no one there. And I met that in both of my teachers. Took me quite a while with Kobun, but I saw it right away in Trungpa. There wasn't anyone there, just the lineage. More if you have it.
Is all emotion that vastness?
Yes. That's why you can't hardly stand up. It's like looking right at the sun all the time. It's that powerful. Can't look at the sun. Too much. It's too much light.
Is intellect also at best?
Yes. Yes, but the awareness has to precede, go ahead of that, to use a little bit of directionality there. It just a way of talking about it. Doesn't really do that either, but it's just awareness, and then everything shows up in the awareness. Consciousness only, and what shows up in consciousness is consciousness. What shows up in consciousness is consciousness. Even though it may be for 20 minutes, may be solid, or 20 centuries, may be solid. More if you have it. This is why it's so important to just receive. You just receive, then you produce, like what I can't describe what I was receiving when that emotionality starts to come up. But the emotionality is, you can't control that. I can't stop it and try to look more civilized or look more debonair or more in control of my emotions or my feelings. I'm not in control of anything. I could fly into a rage and dive out that window. It's powerful to see what opens up when you finally stop shutting down on your own Buddha nature, and you stop particularly grasping at a personal self or a personal other. In other words, subjective, object. Those I can't say they exactly collapse, but it's like that. It's like you don't see other anymore. You just see this. When you see it in its form, it's Buddha. When you see it in its formlessness, it may be emptiness, it may be wisdom, it may be compassion, but the compassion isn't for something. That's a more primitive kind of sympathy or caring about someone who's weaker than you are. It's no boundaries to it. This town is full of it. That's why I keep coming back here. Can't get away from this town. Even though from a business point of view, this wouldn't be the best place to start a monastery. Choiceless. More? Yoka.
Yoka bowing. I have a few questions from YouTube.
Okay.
Sun in South Korea says, what is the best way to clean my ego and karma? Sun bowing.
Simply put, I'd have to get to know you a little better to give you some more specific advice, but I'm very biased when it comes to this. I mean, I've been doing this for a while. I'm very biased, and do what I say. What? Train your mind. Sit down, hold still, and watch how untrained your mind is over long periods of time. Don't fix anything. Don't correct anything. Nothing has to be clean. It's already pure from the get-go. It's pure appearance. Isn't that so? It's pure appearance. It just looks crazy. It just looks confused. It looks, but look at it closely without adding. Look at it closely without subtracting. Look at it closely without distracting yourself from it by ignoring or going off. And so sit a lot. I have a book out there. You could probably get that book and read it. Sounds like you speak English pretty well. Read that book. There's 108 meditations in there. Take the next 108 days and do one of those every day. And just, it's basically saying the same thing over and over again. Sit down, hold still, watch. Sit down, hold still, watch what moves, what comes and goes. Or do something else. Must be something I'm saying is moving you to even ask the question. So that's what I would say.
Thomas in the UK asks, how to be with someone who is hurtful due to their unhappy mind?
Small doses, I think. It depends on, there's so many conditions there that I don't really know about, but don't give up on them altogether. It sounds like you already have a connection with them, and just keep it to a minimum and no criticism of them. Don't criticize them, not going to help them. They're already dumping enough crap on themselves as it is, probably. But just be with them.
Goes a little further.
Okay.
When others hurt me, I feel division within. Seriously, difficulty ensues. What is that?
You think something is threatened. Nothing is threatened because there isn't anyone. There's the illusion of anyone. There's the illusion of me and you guys, and some of us are tall, some are short, some are men, some are women, some are not sure what they are. And that all of that is available, acceptable, and receivable. You can receive everything. Don't shut anything out. But that doesn't mean you don't go to extremes and don't lock your door at night. There's a lot of crazy people out there who will not be kind to you, perhaps. So be reasonable, be pragmatic, but at the same time, receive.
What about, where is that emotionality now?
Everywhere. It's all over the place. It's just not coming out here. There's a body here. There are vocal cords. There's a human form, as there are all over the place. So I don't know. It has something to do with the timelessness of everything. This what I feel is feels like it's ageless. It's not an emotion about something. It's just raw emotion, and it has to do with suffering of everyone. Particularity is a bunch of people. Some of us are monks, and we're all in here on Denko Way, and we're all training, and I'm sitting here as much as I can, and you sit here and you look at the wall, and we do a few forms together. We have a orderly traditional meal, oryoki, eating with the 3-bowl meal, which everything is kind of ritualized to give us a form where we can all eat together, communicate, cooperate, collaborate with each other so we can do something as simple as eat. But even in that area, there's friction. So it's about awareness. It's not about getting rid of the friction. It's also not about overdosing on the friction and kind of destroying yourself. Sure.
So Bowing, how did you stop arguing with Larry? Bowing.
Started listening to him. I love him. I met him we were both in the 4th grade. He said, "Want a cigarette?" I said, "You smoke?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." You know what brand it was?
Lucky Strike.
Marbles. They were 17 cents a pack. Pretty good smoke. You know, we were buds from then on. And we would, one more thing about Larry, because you weren't supposed to be smoking, and he had to steal his dad's marbles, or his dad's, there's another old brand back in the 50s, it was called Wings. It was also a cigarette, but he would, if somebody else was in his house, he would call me or I would call him, and he says, we called them rocket fuels. You got any rocket fuels? Yeah, I got a few. I'll right up. Got a secret name so you could, if somebody was eavesdropping. So you could see why I kind of like Larry. Further question? Or should we close? Is there a question on Zoom that I have not? Don't mean to ignore anyone there. Georgios. Still can't hear you. Have you got your? No, you're gonna have to turn on your microphone. I think that's what they call it. It's a little red thing with a line through it. This guy right here. He looks muted to me. Huh? He looks muted to me. Yeah, you're muted. You're muted. I don't read lips. You're gonna, holding one finger up.
Okay, now you listen to me.
Now now I listen to you.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't saw it was muted.
Sure.
I just I really don't have many questions because I just like to listen what you say, and I just find resonating many things. You know, it's not something that you need to. You understand already, and probably also the people there that your students probably for making this kind of questions, they already know all that. And, but with the discussion, you probably understand more things. You can go deeper in your own thoughts, mind stream, you know, all that stuff you are talking about. And you don't really need to be a Buddhist to practice that. You know that. But but Buddhism, I believe, is not a religion. It's a realization of the human construct of body and mind, how it works that way. I'm not so good in English. That's why also I'm not speak too much. I'm not asking too much. But I understand
Very
what
good.
you're saying.
Very good. Thank you for your teaching. Thank you.
Thank you for your teaching.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm always a student. I'm always a student in this life.
All right.
Because to be a student, you can make some mistakes, you know. If you are a teacher, there are not mistakes to make. You know.
Thank you, sir. So, question over here? Go ahead.
How are students your teacher?
Well, I think it's just different all the time. So there's no one way that shows up. It's just that everyone is different. It's a different dynamic that I have with you, or with the computers doing something funny. So yeah, it's just so there's no standard way I can say. Just if I'm listening to you, just like if I'm listening to this gentleman here, I'm understanding something about what he's saying, and he's making statements about the way he even started endeavoring to teach me something about something I've been practicing for half a century. And what do? I listen to him. Do I agree? Do I disagree? Doesn't matter. That's where we get caught into the cage of our beliefs, our opinions, or ideas. Don't do that. No, you have to be able to receive. You don't have to be able to do anything, but if you're going to train your mind, you're going to have to receive everything that shows up. You learn from the teacher. By receiving from the teacher, you learn how to receive from everyone. More?
You've said before, I think you used like 3 decades, like you studied and practiced this before you started teaching.
At least.
Does it look like you're still being a student like you were in those first 30 years?
Oh, no, there's differences, but they aren't the kind of thing that you'd say something has changed. Just more receiving. There's still, nobody has improved. Nobody's gotten worse. I don't shoplift anymore, if that's what you're asking about. And I don't, if I went to your house and saw $20 on the table, I certainly wouldn't pick it up and put it in my pocket, but I would have when I was 12. Yes?
Is the teacher an example of a student?
Somewhat, I think. I understand what you're asking about. Any further questions? Further questions on Zoom? Okay, well, let's call it, what are we going to call it? You're going to dedicate the merit? Yeah, so will we go back to sitting? Or I think we do tonight. We're in the middle of Denkaway, so we're sitting till what, 9 o'clock? Is that true? So you can all join us or go watch a movie. It's a lot more fun. Thank you. Susan, Susan, are you sure, Susan, you don't have a question? Come on. Everybody's standing up, so spit it out. Another microphone discrepancy.
I'm sorry, Susan Bowling. So you tell us to sit down. If we want to see our true nature, if we want to see the truth of the way things are, we sit down and hold still and watch our minds, watch the craziness in our minds.
Yes.
I've never heard you say if we want to see our true nature that we need to attend book studies or Dharma talks. So I'm interested to know, how do those support seeing who we are? Bowing.
Yeah, well, you might need to, you might be able to just sit as possible. I think it's possible, less likely, but also the ego, the self-centered part of the consciousness needs something to feed on that makes sense logically, and that's something, if you look at the Buddha's teaching down through the centuries, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12 links on the chain of existence, and on and on and on. There's just so many different texts out there that talk about the nature of consciousness not being a separate being, and the nature of consciousness as being beyond duality or this and that, up and down, back and forth, life and death, Buddhas and sentient beings. So we need some of the concepts, so to give us a little bit of inspiration to go back, because just sitting and facing a wall, really, really difficult without some kind of a alternation into using the intellect. So it's sometimes called traditionally the two wings of the bird: the intuition, which is what's happening facing the wall, and the intellect, or what is happening when you're studying the cutting through spiritual materialism, or any other Dharma text. All the teachings of Dogen Zenji are amazing, because it's like, when you read that, it's like reading something that is intuitive and something that's intellectual at the same time. It's amazing. So I think starting out by facing the wall, but also maybe some people just need to start out by reading Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which is, I recommend that and have for close to 50 years. More, Susan?
Susan Bowing. So once I heard you say that if you had to choose, like your time was limited and you had to choose between attending a book study or facing the wall, you should face the wall. Is that still what you would say, Bowing?
Yes, I would. Face the wall. Thank you so much. Are we going to dedicate the merit?
Thank you, Bowing. Going to sleep.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi fu, shi son mu sa mo sa, mo ko ja ho mi. The 10 directions, the 3 times, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
return to sitting and reset the room so that